Hello and welcome everyone. So let's take a look at an example like this here. So we'll start off with a pretty straightforward thing here. If it's true that AC is greater than AB, the measure of angle C is greater than the measure of angle A, why is it true that the measure of angle 2 is greater than the measure of angle A? Again, I suggest that you pause this video for a bit and think about this before we actually go through it. Okay? So the first thing to note here is that, well, AC is greater than AB. That's an important piece of information here. That tells you that this side of the triangle is longer than this one. So that means we can kind of think of it the other way around. So if this is bigger, that means it should be bigger in the same direction, sort of, right? It should look like that here. So this allows us to get from AC is greater than AB. So this allows us to conclude here that the measure of angle 2 is greater than the measure of angle C, right? And it makes sense that we have this sort of thing here. And now we have angle C is greater than angle A. So now we can put these two together and get to the fact that the measure of angle 2 is greater than the measure of angle A here. Okay, I mean, that seemed pretty straightforward here, and that worked out pretty well. So note here that, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, you kind of knew that this had to be coming here relatively soon, this idea of writing these proofs. But, you know, before you actually, consider this, write this off here, remember that the nice part about these proofs is that there are a lot fewer theorems here, right? We had a lot of theorems in congruent triangles and the like here. Here we have very few theorems. All the theorems that we've looked at, the ones that you're going to be using are the ones that you've seen already, plus maybe a couple of theorems that are imported from standard congruence geometry here. And you also note that as a result, because of that, the proofs have a tendency to be somewhat short. I think that most of the proofs here, on average, will be something like 5 or 6 steps, whereas a proof with congruent triangles may be on average, 7 to 8 steps here. So it's going to be a little bit shorter. So we can actually now start to combine our ideas together. So remember that you're just going to use the same techniques that you would if this were a standard congruence triangle proof here. So you can just use whatever method that you seem fit, whether it's in 2-column form or in paragraph form here. So I'm just going to go ahead and write that out here really quickly. And this should be pretty good here. Okay. So remember, the idea is that we start off with the fact that AC is greater than AB. So I'm going to mention that here. That's going to be given to us. Now, we remember the big link was that allowed us to jump from here to here. So we got to 2 is greater than C. So we can go ahead and do that here. We can say that the measure of angle 2 is greater than the measure of angle C here. And the reason being, in a triangle. Now remember, you have to remember that with this theorem, it works in a specific triangle here. So you have to mention the fact that it works in a single triangle. Okay, so in a triangle, the larger angle is opposite the longer side. Okay, and that's from step 1 here. I think you can see that's our case here. That works out pretty well. Okay, and now we can also introduce the other piece of information here. We were given that the measure of angle C is greater than the measure of angle A here. That's also given to us. And then finally here, now, note that in this situation that we have two things here, two things that match like this. So we're going to be using this here, chain it together. You said the measure of angle 2 is greater than the measure of angle A here. Notice that this here is not going to be, substitution postulate, because substitution says substitute equals for equals. There are no equalities here. We have 2 greater than, so we're going to be using transitive property here. This is our transitive property. Now, I'll mention of inequality here. You don't need to, but if you want to be very careful about this, you can just mention that this is going to be the transitive property of inequality here, because we also have a transitive property that works for equality. So you have to be kind of careful about that here. So this here, I'll just underline this in purple. This here is completely optional. You don't need to write it in here. But if you want to be particularly clear, you can mention this here, and you'll be just fine.